Could you guys come up with us? Okay. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Yeah.
Come on in, pretend like you like each other.
Okay.
Yep, we got it.
All right. Got it. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. Part of my responsibility as governor is to help safeguard our state and our citizens from disasters, including drought. We want to nip it in the bud. The entire state of Kansas has been considered in drought or abnormally dry conditions for the past several weeks. As you can see from our map here on the side, there are 28 counties that are in a state of drought emergency right now, the counties in red. 29 are in the warning stage, and 48 are in the watch stage right now. The entire 105 counties of the state of Kansas are at risk or experiencing drought right now. This has led to a very high risk of fire hazards, and many have already occurred. I'd like to commend what we saw last week. We'd like to commend local fire departments, KDOT, Department of Agriculture, the Kansas Department of Emergency Management, Kansas Guard, National Weather Bureau, and many other agencies who came together to nip those fires in the bud. We had over 50 fires last week, and we're in danger of more. We got a message from our emergency management liaison that it's looking like beginning Thursday of this week, Thursday, beware the Ides of March, that through at least the first half of the next week, that we will see an elevated to significant fire conditions returning across the state. This will be especially in the western and southern parts of the state. Tracy Streeter, the director of the Kansas Water Office and chairman of the governor's drought response team, as well as the rest of our team, have been monitoring the dry weather situation in our state for the past few weeks. And they have advised me that we are now in a severe enough drought condition to require an executive order. As a state with a strong agriculture base, droughts have a big impact on our hardworking Kansans. They must have water to feed their animals and the water to grow our crops that feed the world. Without sufficient water for these important industries, our economy as a whole is at risk. And as you know this very well. In fact, we had even gotten through a whole year without a drought, and now we're back. As a result today, I'm taking the following actions. We are going to try to nip it in the bud. First, we will be signing Executive Order 1811. It declares a drought watch, warning, or emergency for all 105 counties in Kansas. This authorizes and directs all agency under my jurisdiction to implement the appropriate watch, warning, or emergency level response actions assigned to them in their operations plan for drought response. Second, we will also institute a suspension of height and weight regulations on trucks carrying hay to expedite the process of allowing other states to move hay into drought-stricken areas. The third item in our action plan is that we will be signing 2 letters today, one to Executive Director David Shem and the other to our county FSA directors. The purpose of the letter is to make them aware of the drought declaration so they can begin the process of requesting access to additional acres of land such as CRP land for haying and grazing. We think that this is an appropriate use at this time. This is a way that we can help all farmers and ranchers use their CRP and other lands that are available. We know this is a difficult situation, and we believe in Kansans and that they will do the right things, and they are working with us. We want to get ahead of this and as much as possible. And so I want to first thank Tracy Streeter, who will now give some of the finer details of our drought response. Tracy.
Thank you, Governor. Well, you've seen the graphics of what we have proposed to the governor, and I just want to, thank the governor's drought response team, and some of them are here today. It's a well-coordinated group. Drought's no stranger to Kansas, and as such, we really have become very good at rallying the troops when the time is right. And we've been monitoring this drought for actually months. And agriculture feels drought first in the state, and some of our ag producers have started experiencing the effects of drought even last year, late in the summer, and even during the growing season in some places. From a water supply standpoint, the drought really hasn't stressed us all that much yet. The reservoir levels are pretty stable, but this is a good time to raise that awareness with our public water suppliers to get those drought ordinances out and look at their conservation plans, be prepared to put them into effect. Because as you know, drought's insidious, and you never know when to jump in and start taking action. But I guess the rule of thumb is that you should be doing it earlier rather than later. And so that's kind of the key message today, is to make everybody aware of the declarations that the governor is getting ready to sign, and have folks really be proactive and look at their own situations at home and make sure that they're prepared, because quite frankly, the forecast is not for it to improve. At least in the short run, we don't see any indications of drought letting up, although we do have, I think, an 80% chance of rain on Thursday, and I hope that's right. But if the climatologists and the meteorologists looking forward are seeing no significant relief, at least in the short run. We do happen to see a little bit of relief in May, and we'll see if that comes to fruition or not. We hope it does. But really, our message today is to get the word out and to tell everyone it's time to start looking at your drought contingency plans. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Secretary of Ag, Jackie McClaskey.
Well, thank you, Tracy. And I also want to thank the governor for taking the opportunity today to not only sign the executive order and take these other action steps, but also doing it in a very public way. It's very easy for farmers and ranchers across our state to know that they're facing tough times right now with the drought. But it's also important that every other Kansan understands the impact that the drought has on their neighbors across our state. Maybe they don't see it in their home county, but to know that this percentage of the state, sorry, the map's not up there anymore, but when you look at that map and you think about that significant portion of the state and the amount of agricultural production that comes out of that state is important to each and every Kansan. Everyone in this room has heard me say before, Kansas' largest industry is agriculture. Agriculture makes up 45% of our state's economy and contributes $68 billion to our state. When you face a drought, it matters to each and every Kansan, and taking the steps becomes especially important at this stage. It's also time for us to start working with our federal partners. The letters that the governors are going to sign will then allow us to start working with the state FSA office and the county offices to make the request for emergency haying and grazing. And the timing is important in this regard because we want to get that done so they can get some potential haying and grazing done at this stage prior to going into nesting seasons and some of that CRP ground. And the other piece that's important is something that we have learned. We've learned hard lessons as we've dealt with wildfires over the last couple of years. But that emergency haying and grazing can also be an asset in fire suppression. In areas where there is a lot of fuel, being able to utilize that fuel for livestock in the time of drought will also allow us to hopefully defer wildfires from some of those areas. So each step being taken today is very important to Kansas and farmers and ranchers, like some of the good folks that are standing behind us, but also important to each and every Kansan. So again, I want to thank the governor for his leadership in this area, and we look forward to helping folks deal with the challenges they're going to face. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank, we have several members from the Kansas Farm Bureau who are here in the Capitol today, and we appreciate you coming and being a part of this event, and as you're talking to legislators, how important it is that we deal with this situation. So with that, we will get to the main business. So this will first be signing the executive order. What's today's date? The 12th,
12th.
Isn't it? Okay, just making sure.
It's the 13th.
It's the 13th. We could have done this yesterday.
Yeah.
And then secondly, we will be signing the letters to get out to the counties so that they can begin the response. Thank you. Yep, you'll hand them around, or here, I'll hand a couple on this side. Here, great. So, we want to thank you all for coming, and we appreciate everyone's support and help on this. Thank you. Yeah, we can take some questions about the drought.
I don't know if this should go to Director Streeter or Secretary McClaskey, but you mentioned contingency plans, people should be looking at them. What should be in those contingency plans? What should people be thinking about if they don't have a complete contingency plan for drought?
Well, from a public water supply standpoint, they should be assessing their source and know, are the aquifer levels declining? Are they having, in some of our areas, it's fairly common for the aquifer levels to decline, and are they any threat if the drought continues to worsen? Same is true with surface water, is to take a look at their intakes, and are they going to have enough storage or to be able to meet their needs going forward. So you want to look at your raw water source first. You want to check your secondary sources. If your primary source is under some sort of threat, then you've got to look at your alternative plans for water supply if those tend to fail. Conservation ordinances, most if not all municipalities have a conservation plan in place that have triggers. They tend to kind of follow the guidance the state provides on that, so they need to pull those out and take a look at them if they haven't already, and make sure they're ready to adopt the appropriate ordinances that might be, restricting some outdoor watering, different things that they want to do at the community level. But that's very much their decision on how they want to mitigate the drought effects. But it's all contained in their conservation plan. So really, it's just a matter of them taking the tools they probably have ready to go and make sure that they're looking at them right now. I'm not aware of any communities that have invoked any sort of drought ordinances at this point, but that's certainly, we get to that point. You start usually with, maybe you might see alternative day watering occur in a city, and then you work your way. As things progressively get worse, then you start looking at those things like suspending, high water uses, but those are pretty rare. We didn't see hardly any car washes impacted, except I can remember one in 2010 or 11 because the drought was so bad that it affected a high water user like a car wash.
Jackie, would you actually expect irrigation to increase in a drought, or would you advise to conserve water and not actually irrigate?
Tim, you're going to appreciate my answer and say it depends. One of the advantages we have is there has been so much discussion about the tenets of the water vision that are based off local decisions and local conservation. We have a lot more folks functioning under what we just approved as the second local enhanced management area, more and more people joining water conservation areas, more folks using higher end technology like moisture probes and a more efficient irrigation, that they're making steps that are going to allow them to use less water anyway. So the hope would be, in the case of a drought, that they're certainly not using more water than they would have prior to implementing those technologies. But some folks have decisions to make. There's still time, depending on where you live and what you plant, to make decisions about what you plant to use a more water efficient crop. There's certainly decisions to be made about how much you plant and where you plant. That folks will be having to decide what's best. And I think one of the keys about doing this as early as we are is really getting folks to have those conversations and getting them talking to their county FSA offices and making the request for emergency haying and grazing, because that's going to influence how they need water down the road, depending on how they use the acres that they currently have access to.
Okay, at some point, do we see, we talk about grazing, we see cattle grazing in state parks.
It's not CRP.
It's a no. Right now, we're talking about Conservation Reserve Program land. I will tell you, in 12 and 13, the discussions got relatively creative. We were talking about haying hang some public grounds to be able to utilize that grass if it was possible. I can't recall that we actually did it, but we talked about every possible solution, because one of the things in 12 and 13 that happened is we were so short of not only water and forage supplies, and getting them into the state was at times a challenge because everyone in the Midwest was fighting for the same product. That people had to sell a lot of livestock. And because our inventory went down, we're just now getting at the place of starting to build it back up sufficiently, and we don't want to see that happen again. So I'm not going to say, Martin, that creativity won't come to play, but our hopes is, because we're ahead of this, that we won't get into that kind of situation.
And Governor, maybe you already answered this earlier, but maybe talk about the importance of signing this today. There's a lot of burns last week, kind of Wichita area, so maybe talk a little bit about the importance of signing this.
Sure. We have been experiencing some drought conditions, particularly in the southern part of the state, but it's really affecting the entire state, and we will need to get at this to nip it in the bud now. Last week, we had over 50 fires across the state. We even had to deploy Black Hawk helicopters, but it was really largely the local firefighters working with the Department of Emergency Management and other organizations that we were able to get control of this. We expect additional fire risk coming up here starting on Thursday. For the next few days, we're going to be at a high fire risk. So we felt it was very appropriate to get after this now. But in addition, not only just in terms of the wildfire, but some of the big economic impacts that this could potentially have on the state.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. No, he had one. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, just, I saw the map, but what I guess I would like to know, and none of you are meteorologists, so maybe you can answer the question quickly, but I'll direct it to Tracy. How much rain do we need to mitigate this, really? I mean, because one day of rain, as nice as the chance is, and as welcome as it would be, is not going to change it. What are we talking about?
You know, there actually is a number. I can remember in the previous drought that there were, how many inches of moisture do we need to crawl out of the hole we were in with the drought, but I don't have those. I'm sure if you look at the southern part of the state, it's a bigger hill to climb than what you see in the northwest, north central, northeast, obviously. One thing I'd like to point out, if you would to take we get a lot of our guidance from the U.S. Drought Monitor that kind of helps us decide what's due here in Kansas. And if we had the Drought Monitor up here right now and looked at the Great Plains state, Oklahoma, the panhandles of both Oklahoma and Texas are in worse shape than we are. And I just would remind people that that's kind of the way the last drought shaped up. It started in Texas and grew, and that's what we're seeing right now. Those red areas in Kansas that we see that's our drought emergency are considered a D3 according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, and that is an extreme drought. There's one more stage called a D4 that's worse, and you can see that color map. If you look at Oklahoma and Texas in the Drought Monitor, you'll see that dark red area has grown week to week and migrating to the north. So that's what really prompted us to go into action and suggest to the governor we need to take action now.
Can you talk about the status of the Kansas River overall?
Sure. I looked at reservoirs just before the press release, and our reservoir levels are stable. Tuttle Creek, Milford, and Perry, they're all a little bit below conservation pool, but that's normal for this time of year, and inflows are okay. So we're really, as far as the Kansas River is concerned, I don't think there's any imminent threat. But we do have to keep our eye on natural flows that come from the Smoky Hill River and come into the Republican and the Milford and see how those are behaving. And if we start seeing our inflows start to dwindle, that's when we become more concerned, because the Kansas River has the Kansas Water Assurance District backing it up. So when the natural flows aren't meeting our needs, we make reservoir releases from Tuttle Creek and Milford to meet the municipal and industrial water needs from Junction City all the way to Kansas City. So we're blessed on the Kansas River to have that reservoir storage as backup, which is why in the governor's water vision, we make such a big deal about reservoir sedimentation. How important that is to curb that and remediate that, because when these droughts get into a multi-year situation and our storage is running thin, we're out of options at that point.
All right. Thank you all very much.